morning, friends. Jill here. Welcome back to Whispering Willow Farms. I'm out in the garden this morning, which is starting to look kind of sad. If you guys can see behind me, a lot of my plants are just not looking really well. I was salvaging the leaves off of like my broccoli and cauliflower after I'd already harvested the heads off of them, and I was keeping the plastic off, and frost has just destroyed them all, and that's okay. We've just been harvesting and eating a lot. But I am out in the garden today because I want to talk to you guys about my game plan. I've been going through trying to clean off my trellises and just clean up the garden. If you're anything like me, my garden gets some neglect in the wintertime, mainly because I'm a wimp and I don't like the cold, and so the thought of like bundling me and all the children up and coming out here, I'm like, do I really want to do that? Or do I just want to put my focus and my time and energy on something inside? But we had a beautiful day the other day. It was 79 degrees here. It felt just like summertime. So I came out here and I started cleaning off the trellises in the garden, which is exactly what I'm going to finish doing today. I've got one more bean trellis that just needs to be cleaned off. I am taking all of those plants and just putting them all in my compost. That way it's going to have now until the spring to like decompose, and I just want to add all those plants and things like that into the compost. That way I can just use that in the spring, and that soil will be good and worked in. But as I'm coming out here cleaning up things, I'm harvesting things, emptying out beds, it really makes me realize, oh, I need a game plan. So that's what I'm going to talk to you guys about today, is having a game plan set now for your spring garden. Now, you can certainly not have a game plan when you plant your garden. You can walk through your garden and whatever feels right, plant there. And you have the liberty of doing that. Absolutely. There are several years when I was just starting gardening, I didn't really have a written out plan. I would just go out there and be like, okay, I think I'm going to plant this here and that there. Then when I started exploring and researching more in like companion planting, I knew that, like, you know, my tomatoes, I wanted to give them enough space. I also wanted to be able to plant beneficial flowers or trap plants in between those, like marigolds or borage and things like that. So then I kind of changed how I would plan and lay out the garden based off of just my knowledge and what I knew, if that makes sense. And now I know aesthetically in my garden too, like obviously I want beans on my trellises or nasturtiums growing up on my trellises. That's really pretty. I know I want to stagger those. The beauty of like vertical gardening is you can take these trellises down really easily with the T-post and put them over any bed. So even though I had the trellises where I had them this year, I have the liberty of changing that next year, which is really cool because it adds something fun and new into the garden that didn't cost me any money. It just was a little bit of my time trying to move some things around. So if you are like me now and you kind of want to have a game plan and you kind of want to know, plus this takes me a while, I'll draw a rough draft now and then I'll tell you like the next steps that I do. This is not set in stone. I play around with this quite a bit. So I want to start that process now versus spring when it's time to plant and I'm just not certain where I want to plant everything and I'm just kind of left like scratching my head. Oh man, I wish I would have put a little more thought into this back in the winter when I had the time. So I've just got this little notepad and a pen. I recommend getting like a gardening journal. I have gardening journals and I love them, and it's really a good reference too. You can see, okay, well I planted my tomatoes in this bed but it really didn't get enough sun and maybe I should try it in a different bed. It's just good to kind of jot those notes down and go back and reference later. So what I do is I just go through, I have my piece of paper and I'm just going to start like sketching out my beds, and I'll just put here like front bed and then kind of write through what I want to do. So I'll just lay out the entire my garden on paper essentially. I don't know if you guys can see that. So I've just kind of sketched that out there. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to do that. I'm going to sketch out my beds. I'm going to sketch which ones I've got trellises on. And then I'm going to really start jotting down all the information, like, okay, possibly flowers here. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to grab my seed packets and I'm going to see, okay, what is the spacing on these? What is the recommendation for light? Now my garden is most sun, but there are some places like in the bed I'm in right now, the front of this bed will be shaded than the rest of the bed, and that's just because how the sun you know, rises and sets and things like that. But I do think being prepared is never a bad thing, right? Like having your ducks in a row and setting yourself up, especially if maybe you're doing a farmer's market or you're wanting to dabble into profitable farming and selling your produce or selling your flowers, having a game plan up front, figuring out how you're going to best utilize your beds, how you're going to max out the space in your beds, I think is really, really important. So I know my long bed that has my cabbages and things like that now, that entire bed is going to be full of zinnias. And I'm really excited. So I'm going to go grab all my zinnia packages and I'm going to see, okay, what is the recommended spacing? How close can I put these together and just be cranking these out? I've already got a cellar for them. So same with your tomatoes. You know, you want to dedicate a large bed to tomatoes if you want to sell a lot of those. You'll need to think about trellising. Do you want, you know, determinants? Because you can do like just a simple Florida weave with the determinant, not a lot of work. Or if you have an indeterminate, you're going to need some sort of cattle panel trellis or something that allows them to get higher. We do the Josh Satin trellis to make you jealous, and that works really well. It's pretty inexpensive. But just knowing those things now, say you do grow an indeterminate tomato and you are going to need some sort of trellising system, instead of thinking about that after you've already planted it, go ahead and having all of those things in place now while we're kind of in that down season, I feel like is really beneficial, and it takes a lot of that stress off of you in the springtime. Because in the springtime, you know, you're worried about getting everything in, you're worried, if you're like me, I always plant so like where it's borderline, oh, we might still get a frost, and so I'm always like stressed out about that. So anything I can do now to kind of alleviate that stress is really good. Plus, I miss the garden. I'm growing a lot this winter, but it's not anything like the summer garden. One, I like coming outside and feeling the warm sunshine touch down on my skin. And so when I'm sitting here and I'm like dreaming and I'm drawing out and I'm jotting down ideas for how I envision the summer garden, it brings me so much hope for the next season, and I get really excited. It allows me to dream again. And I feel like in the winter, things just shift gears. I mean, I'm doing a lot of things inside. I'm not outside near as much. I miss being out here. I miss getting my hands in the soil like I usually do. So it just allows me that opportunity to come out here and just dream again. And just dream of all the possibilities and all the abundance that is going to happen. And if you don't come out here with a notepad and you don't write out your beds, that's okay. If you just come out here and you just dream for the future of your garden, I say that's worth it. I say that is worth just walking through your garden and trying to figure out, even if you just ask God, what do you want me to plant? Like, what do you want me to do with my garden? I think there's value in that. And I think there's value in being open to new things and new possibilities. I know that I never dreamed of growing flowers to sell. I just didn't. When I thought about things I would grow to sell, produce is just what came to mind. I liked having zinnias. You know, I like growing sunflowers for my own kitchen table. I think that's sweet. But when I realized that there was more profit for me in growing flowers that took less time and less of my attention than a tomato, I realized, oh, well, that makes sense. Why would I not do that? But I also had to do a bit more research. I had to learn things that I didn't know before. I don't know a lot about growing flowers. And so I've just been utilizing this time and really trying to research and figuring out what I can do to have a really successful spring in flowers. So that's also something I recommend you guys do. If you're wanting to dabble into something that you've never dabbled into before, let's say flowers, for instance, and you've never grown flowers, that doesn't mean you can't. I just recommend taking this time, really researching everything you need to know, researching how to properly prune them or cut them, and whatever it is to set yourself up for a really successful spring. Sometimes I think we can kind of get caught up in what we don't know, that we lose sight of the possibility of what we can learn. And the flowers are kind of intimidating to me because I don't know. And I like doing things that I know, right? It's that comfortable spot. But then when I think about it and I realize I'm going to have so much growth this coming season because I'm going to learn things and I'm going to push and challenge myself in ways I never have before, it gets me excited. I like learning new things. They're hard, but they're always really, really rewarding. Another thing I always recommend when you're kind of planning for the spring and planning out your garden and what you want that to look like, I'll do much more detailed videos come the spring on how to actually do a detailed, you know, planning out your garden. This is just like when you're walking through the garden and you kind of want to get that game plan in your mind, these are some of the things I think about. I think about the layout of my garden. I think about aesthetically what I'm trying to achieve. I'm trying to think about how I can utilize my beds best, just things like that. What I always think about as well is when I rip out my garden, what do I need to amend the soil with to get it prepared and right for spring? Also say I have something like a Brussels sprout over here that I know it's going to take longer. I haven't actually harvested any Brussels sprouts from them yet, so they're going to be in here longer than my other plants, right? I've been harvesting cabbages for weeks now. I'll probably only be harvesting cabbages for a few more weeks until they're done, so I'm not worried about that. With my Brussels sprouts, they're going to be in the ground much longer. But I need to make sure that they're out of this bed in enough time for me to add amendments and let that work its magic before I plant in it for the spring. Now I know that might sound confusing, and it's really not that tricky. I just want to make sure that I'm able to test my soil with just a pH soil test. A viewer actually sent us one, and I cannot wait to use it because I've been adding certain things, but the pine shavings I know really kind of messed up my soil some, so I'm going to be able to, once I harvest everything in here, do that pH soil test and know exactly how to amend my beds for the spring. If you're overwintering your beds, you've probably already done that and you're fine. So if you don't have anything planted in your beds and you've just overwintered your beds, they should be fine to plant in come spring. However, if you're like me and you still have produce in a lot of your beds, I just want to make sure that the soil hasn't been depleted of all its nutrients before I pour all those nutrients back into the soil and create that good environment for my next season. Because really, if you don't have your soil right, I have found that nothing's right. Soil for your plant starts make a huge deal. When you're starting seeds, you want to make sure you have a good quality soil that is going to allow those little seedlings and those little starts to thrive. Because if you don't have good plant starts and good seedlings, then you don't have a good successful garden year, and we don't want that. So soil really is one of the main things I am thinking through when I'm trying to get a game plan for my garden for the spring. I'm thinking, okay, what do I need to amend with? What are my soil needs? Are there clumps in the soil? Is there erosion in the soil? Am I seeing, just things that aren't good and I don't want in there? And that's something that's always just something I'm always mindful of, honestly, because if you don't have soil, you're not going to have good plants. You're not going to have a successful year, and then you're going to be discouraged, and we don't want that. My little dino kales. Doing pretty good. It was so slow growing because this was the bed that I had the pine shavings in, and it just did not do my soil any service. Honestly, I just had such a hard time. As you can see, the Salvanova lettuce that I planted still never did anything. My purple kale is coming up, but slowly. The collards are actually starting to take off. This little head lettuce, we've just been harvesting the leaves just for salads and stuff. But it does make a difference because all the plants in this bed, when I had compromised soil, took a lot longer to become established and to do well versus this bed over here that I knew my soil was well, and now my plants were thriving because of that. This little cabbage is in here. Look at that. I really want to take an opportunity just to encourage you guys. If this is your first time gardening, the spring season is going to be your first time gardening, and maybe you've never tested your soil before and you don't know things to look for. You've never started seeds and all this is new. Don't get overwhelmed with the newness. As seasons go by, you will learn and you'll adapt and you'll just kind of figure out your own ways and tricks and trades of the garden. I just want to encourage you that you're starting, and that is a big step. That's oftentimes the most intimidating step, is just to start. So having a game plan in your garden, having a vision of where you want things to be planted in your garden, where you want your trellises, I do think that that's really important. Knowing your soil and what your plants are going to need is really important. But the fact that you're starting, the fact that you are, growing food for your family or for your community or for whatever reason you're wanting to grow your food, that's a big deal. I am proud of you. I pray abundance for you in your garden. I pray that the Lord would teach you lots of beautiful things and lots of wonderful lessons out in the garden. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today. I just wanted to kind of run through, when I come through the garden and I start cleaning up the garden, I start thinking about preparing a game plan. These are some of the things I do. These are some of the things that I think about. We'll go into much more detailed videos as we get closer to seed starting season and the spring garden. But I just thought, well, these are some of the things I do. I hope that they're helpful for you guys. But thank you for hanging out with me today. I'll talk to you soon.